Hey everyone, this is Lucas Hall from Landlordology and Cozy. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. I'm super pumped to be here. This is actually one of my favorite webinars to give. The content, I think, is just a really great way for basic to advanced landlords to really get a solid foundation for being a, um, a successful landlord. So let's go over some ground rules real quick. If you have a question, feel free to type it into the chat window, or if you can see the questions window, either of which would work just fine. And I'll start collecting those as we go through the presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have an opportunity to talk about those questions and try to get those answered for you live on the air here. So if you have any other concerns, or the audio goes out, or some sort of technical difficulty, you can also communicate that through that chat window, and I'll put in a little chat real quick to show you where that is. So let's get started. I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time, and this presentation will run about an hour, and we'll have plenty of time hopefully at the end to do question and answer. So without further ado, this presentation is entitled Essential Tips for Being a Successful Landlord. On the agenda tonight, we have, first I'm going to go through these tips according to the landlord lifecycle. And what that means is I think that every landlord kind of goes through a general life cycle when they're renting out their property, and those phases are clearly defined, and there's tips for each one of those. Next, we'll go into important rental laws kind of at a national level, and best practices according to those laws, but it's important to know that each state and even each locality or municipality has its own rental laws too, in addition to things that might be set federally. And then number three, I'll go through some useful guides and resources that I think over the last 10 years of my landlording life have been really helpful to me, and things that I've actually created to try to help you, all of which are completely free. So who am I? Again, my name is Lucas Hall. I've been a landlord for approximately 10 years. I'm telling you this so that hopefully I can win you over, and that you know whether or not, why I'm qualified to talk about this. I founded a website called landlordology.com. Shortly thereafter, that website got purchased by Cozy, which is a company that makes software for landlords. And I currently am the chief landlordologist and community manager over there. It's a great company, and I enjoy working for them. And we're really making a difference in the landlord-tenant relationship with thousands of landlords all across the country. But Landlordology really started out as a website that was built out of necessity. When I was getting started, I really didn't know what I was doing, and I searched through the web, and I found some sites, but nothing that was really dedicated to landlording, and nothing that could really give me a awesome foundation to build, a profitable portfolio on. And so I wanted to build something. So about 6 or 7 years after I had been a landlord and I had really gotten everything down to a really streamlined process and everything was profitable, I thought, I could teach this to people. So that's where Landlordology came from. It was always free. It's always going to be free. And it's just a way for me to help educate people and instill best practices for landlording and real estate among landlords and property managers nationwide. Number four, or the fourth bullet, is it's important to note that I am not a lawyer. We are going to talk about some laws here, but they're just general laws, and I give landlording advice and not legal advice. So you definitely want to run anything by a lawyer before you go and take any action on a tenant, good or bad. So lastly, I have about 4 properties and about 17 tenants, and I say about or approximately because that fluctuates when I buy or sell properties, and depending on the year, I might have as high as 25 tenants. I know that's small potatoes for some of you guys who manage hundreds of units, but that's kind of where I sit right now as an independent landlord. The way I got started, actually, and I'll tell this story to give people a little bit more time to jump on. There's always a few stragglers, but congratulations for those who are on time. I got started in landlording actually because I was trying to impress a girl. I like this a lot because I used to see this girl about once a week, and I thought she was cute and I liked her, and I would strike up conversations at every opportunity I could. And one time I said, hey, how was your week? And she goes, oh, well, it was great. I bought a house. And I thought, oh my gosh, what are you talking about? You bought a house? You're like 23 or 24. She's like, yeah, I bought a house and I'm gonna rent out the extra bedrooms and basically have those tenants pay for my mortgage and I'll live there for free. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's smart and pretty, right? But I thought, I really like this girl. I want to impress her. So I did the next logical thing and I hired her sister, who was a real estate agent. And I said, go find me another house in her neighborhood. And so we did. And I bought that house and I did exactly the same thing that she did. I went and found, 5 of my closest buddies and we lived in a house together. I found them all through Craigslist, so they weren't really my friends, but we became close friends. And we shared that house and they paid for my mortgage. And so I lived there practically for free. And I basically saved up money and bought another house and then kind of did the same thing and kept buying and kept buying. So that's how I got started. And it ended up pretty well because we ended up getting married and we've been married for about 6 years now. And we actually recently adopted a little girl from Ethiopia. And that's actually a picture of my family at the orphanage when we went to go pick her up. So we were just blessed and we really enjoy the rental properties and the freedom it's given us to do other things in our life, like spend time with each other and travel. So let's get started. Remember that landlord life cycle I mentioned? Well, the first step, obviously, is to advertise and market your showing. So you have to give out listings and set up showings for people to come see it. So what are some useful tips to help get that going? In my opinion, Craigslist and Postlets are still number one. So I think that there are 1,000 marketing sites out there, and Zillow and Truly are awesome. And Zillow actually owns Postlets, but it's Craigslist.com and Postlets.com. And Craigslist obviously is a no-brainer. People flock to that, and that's where you can find a lot of your tenants. But Postlets is a nice little syndication website where you create one ad, and then they help you with sending that ad to Zillow and Postlets and HotPads and all the other sites that you probably already use anyway. But when you make a change on Postlets, it'll actually reflect that change on the other ads as well. So the only 2 places I ever post are Craigslist and Postlets, and then that feeds it to all the other sites, and therefore I start getting responses from Trulia or Zillow or other places, but it was just because I had that Postlets ad. So I think that's all you really need. So give those 2 a try. Number 2, pictures. I like to say that they have to have the oh pretty effect, and that's basically when someone's flipping through Craigslist or your ad and they see that picture and they actually stop and say, ooh, pretty. Well, that means something. That's really important, because if you want them to stop and focus and read what you're saying, you need to catch their attention. For the same reason that people put on nice clothes and try to get other people's attention that way. You're doing the same thing. You're putting something attractive up there for them to see. So it's really, really smart to invest in a good camera to take those pictures. Or if you don't have a camera or aren't good at taking pictures, then you can hire companies to do that. Again, on Craigslist, there are a ton of professional photographers hoping for business. So you could call them up and contract them to do a small photo shoot of your property between tenants. And it'll just, I don't know what the fees are. They probably vary, but you can probably get a lot done for under $100. Also, another company I like really well is called Circle Pix, Pix, circlepix.com. And that website is a national company that actually will send out a photographer, and they'll not only take great pictures, but they will give you a little website to host them on. And they'll take those 360-degree pictures that you sometimes see on real estate websites, which are pretty neat and cool. Number 3, after you start getting inquiries and you want to show the property, let's hope you have the problem where you have a lot of people interested, right? And you're not sure where you're going to find the time to show the property to them. But what I like to do, and this is something I call the Landlord's Open House. I don't know if I coined the term or possibly, but I call it the Landlord's Open House. And basically on Monday or Tuesday of a week, you post an ad. And then in that ad, you say, hey, guys, I'm setting up showings for Saturday or Sunday, or pick a day, between the hours of 1 and 4. Please call me or email me to set up an appointment. And so you still are taking scheduled appointments, but you have it blocked in a certain window of time. So you're basically doing an open house, except everything is scheduled. What I do is I start scheduling applicants, or I should say potential tenants, who want to come see the place, and I'll schedule them for every 30 minutes and sometimes even every 15 minutes if I have a lot of people. And I'll just pump them in there back to back, between the hours of 1 and 4. And what that does is it accomplishes a few things. One, it gives me a window of time that I can actually tell my current tenants to know what to expect. And I can say, hey, listen, I'm showing up at 1 o'clock. I'm going to be there for 3 hours. I'm just going to show the place to as many people as I can. It would be great if you just decked out of there and went and got lunch somewhere, or went and saw a movie, and then when you come back, I'll be gone. And it gives them the comfort to know that I'm taking care of them, and I'm going to be there when the property is getting shown, and that they know that it's only for a limited period of time. But then two, every single time I do this, there's always people that show up late or early, and they just can't really get their act in gear. And so what happens is you always have people who overlap with each other. And at first I thought that was not a really good idea, but then I started to realize that it created this sense of competition between the tenants, or I should say the potential tenants. They saw that other people were interested, and it was kind of the same principle where if you see a crowd around something, you just want to go check it out. It's kind of the same thing. There's a crowd around your house and people want to go check it out. So I've done this a number of times with some of the more popular houses, and more than once, I've actually had multiple offers and multiple deposits within that 3 hours. And so I think it's a great way to kind of knock it out in a weekend, and you're done. Next, let's assume that you have multiple interested parties and they want to apply. Use online applications. I can't stress this enough. Like, I used to take a piece of paper with printed application and sit it down at the dining room table, and they'd fill it out and they'd ask me a bunch of questions. And though that does create some personal interaction, they don't really want to do that, and it just creates more paperwork for you. So use online applications. There are a number of companies out there that do this, including Cozy. But it's awesome because not only can you just share a link with them, but they can fill it out beforehand if they know they want the place. And they can even submit credit reports typically along with those applications to help you kind of sway it in their favor. Or perhaps you could even accept an applicant prior to your open house. So wouldn't that be grand? Number two, Social Security numbers are not required. I get funny looks from people every time I say this, and I might be the only person preaching this, but I know for a fact that a Social Security number is not required to screen a tenant. So I don't even collect it on the applications. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, oh, what about credit reports, and what about background checks and all this? Sure, if you want to hire a third-party screening company, like a brick and mortar screening company that has people like running the inquiries, then yes, they will need that Social Security number, simply because they're not you. They don't have an invested interest in your business. They are a third party, and so they need that authority and they need that identifying number to make it happen. But there are so many other technologies out there where you can run a credit report yourself, and the way it's called a soft report, and it's done through Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, and all three credit agencies have systems in place where a landlord can run a credit report without ever asking for that Social Security number. And I actually think they started doing that because identity theft was such a huge deal, and it is a huge deal. It's the number one crime in America. But there are also lots of other softwares out there that'll do this in conjunction with the credit agency on your behalf, Cozy being one of them. But there's other ones too. And so Cozy, actually, I worked with Experian to create their API that allows a landlord to request it, and then the tenant goes and they basically purchase that report and share that credit report with the landlord, all within the single system. So there's no extra logins, no extra websites. There's none of this third party stuff. It's all built in, and it's really, really great because you get this application, and it's in your dashboard, and then all you have to do is click one button that says, go get the credit report if it's not already included. So super easy, super simple, and you're never at risk of collecting that Social Security number. Lastly, in terms of the Social Security number, the only time realistically that you would need a Social Security number is if you were suing a tenant and you win that judgment, and then you want to actually collect on that judgment and hire a third-party agency. So you don't need it to actually go to court. You don't need it to win a judgment. You don't need it to garnish wages. But if you wanted to hire a collections agency, then you would need it. However, landlords have the worst record of collections in the industry, even worse than dentists. So you can hire a collections agency, but the percentages are super low. So good luck. Lastly on this page, number 3, collect applications from all adult applicants. This is super critical because a lot of times you have multiple people living in a house that are adults, but only one person's actually on the lease. And that's because that was only one person actually collected applications. That's the only person you collected applications from. And if that one person decided to get a divorce or leave and just disappear, then you've got a bunch of people living in your house that you have no idea who they are, and they're not on your lease. And so, as long as they're not a minor, you should be putting them on your lease, and you should be collecting applications from all of them. So after you have a bunch of applications and you're screening tenants, right? There are a lot of things that you can do to try to figure out whether or not an applicant is qualified. So among those things, there's only one thing that I really care about. And that's, are they able and willing to pay rent? So I'll say that again. The only thing I really care about is, are they able and willing to pay rent? Everything else can be dealt with, but they have to have the means, whether that's income or some sort of Social Security check, or they have to have some sort of trust fund or something, and then they have to have the desire to actually do it. So everything else kind of feeds into that, but that's the primary question. Number 2, I would call, and I do call, the last 2 landlords that they've lived with. And I ask them a series of questions like, did they pay rent on time? Did they damage your property? Et cetera, et cetera. But then at the end, I usually ask, would you rent to them again? And I like that question because it sums up the entire relationship that they had with that landlord into one answer, right? If I don't ask that, I'm just kind of assuming they would or would not rent to them. Maybe they missed, maybe they were late on rent once, but they lived there for 10 years, and they were excellent tenants and they left the place in great condition, but they were late once. But the landlord would absolutely rent to them again. And then I do check with the last 2 landlords and even 3 if they list 3, because the current landlord doesn't know how that tenant is going to react or how that tenant is actually going to leave the property, because they haven't moved out yet. They're looking for a new place to live. So you always have to go like one more back just to find out what the move out condition was of the property. Number 3, there are a bunch of protected classes in the United States. I call these the Federal 7. It is race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, and disabilities. These are things you don't want to touch or don't want to really screen anybody for. And these will get you in big trouble, and you have to treat everybody the same, no matter where they stand in these classes. Don't discriminate. Just try to treat everyone fairly. And the best way to do that is to set up a criteria, whether that's a credit score or whether that's an income level, and rate everybody the same. You use that same scale. So I like to, and I think I'll mention this later, but I like to, for income, I like to do 2 to 3 times the rent. And I like to just, if possible, I like to kind of do the assessment and collect the application before I even meet them. So I can't be accused of knowing what their color is or their religion or their race. Number 4, sex offender is not a protected class. I don't care, if it was 10 years ago. If you are a sex offender, you will never, ever, 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 ever rent from me. Point blank. Ever. And there's a link to that website. That's the the National Sex Offender Database, and they have links to state databases too. But you can do a simple search based on a name, and you'll find if they're listed there, if they've had any kind of sex offenses in the past. And there actually have been people in other classes that I've taught who've raised their hand and said, that's not true. Sex offenders is a protected class. And so I went and did some research, and the only thing I could find, and this was in California, and the only thing I could find actually was this letter from the Attorney General. And I hope you guys can see that. I switched over. Let's see. It's a letter from the Attorney General in California, and it basically says, of this court case, and it says that people were saying that sex offenders are a protected class for the purposes of housing discrimination. And then the conclusion from the judge and the Attorney General was that no, they're not. Absolutely not. They are not a protected class for the purposes of housing discrimination. And the multiple people that have mentioned this all get advice from lawyers in California since 2006. So, I mean, it's a misunderstanding, but, here's the ruling. It's just ridiculous to think that a choice like sex offense is actually a protected class. And here's the proof. But with that said, let's keep going. After you screen somebody, you then have to start them on the onboarding process, moving them from applicant to tenant. And the best thing I like to do is first start out with a deposit. So I like to collect a deposit before or at lease signings. And basically that means that, hey, if you're serious and you want me to take this unit off the market, you have to provide a deposit for me to hold it, a holding deposit, let's say. And that deposit will then transfer over to become your security deposit after you move in, and we'll hold it for damages at the end, but then we'll give it back, in full if there are any damages. But I usually require that beforehand or, right when we're signing the lease at the very latest. If you have a tool like Cozy or another property management tool that lets you transfer that rent, Cozy will actually, I'm sorry, not that rent, that money. Cozy will actually help you transfer that money before you even sign a lease, which is fantastic because then you can get that money and hold it in case they change their mind, let's say. Number two, landlords can use deposits as compensation for damages, material or financial. So a lot of times I get questions on landlordology that basically say, I know that I can use a deposit to fix a carpet or a window that they broke, but they didn't pay rent for the month of July, so can I hold the deposit for that? It's like, absolutely. It's for damages, generally speaking. Anything that's above normal wear and tear, or if they owe fees or they didn't pay the late fees for 12 months and they were late every single month or even 1 month, it can be compensation for all of that. A lot of times, even for utilities, if they jump ship and don't pay all their utilities and you have $700 in outstanding bills, you can pay those and take it out of their deposit, because otherwise they could, the utility companies could potentially put a lien on your property, at least in water and sewer utility cases they can. But it's important to know that you just can't use a deposit for whatever you want. It has to be actual damages, material or financial. Number three, don't commingle funds at all. So what I do is I usually set up a bank account just for the deposit for each of the properties. I don't even mingle deposits from multiple properties. Set up its own free checking account or free savings account or something that doesn't cost you anything. And if it collects interest, then great, set it up there. But check your state laws to see if you are required to return an interest amount to the tenant, which I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. But just set up something easy that you can get to that has check writing privileges so that you can issue the deposit back later if you need to. But don't mingle it with anything else, because it is the tenant's money. It's not yours. Then once you get the deposit and you're about to sign a lease, here are my tips. Number one, most important, use a rock solid lease and stick to it. It is so critical that people actually have written leases and that they cover a lot of a lot of clauses or a lot of issues that might come up. Basically, you want to have a lease that covers every single situation that might arise. Now, it's impossible to cover everything, but you can try. And what I've done, over the years is I've modified my lease and had lawyers look at it. And what they've done is they've added to it as things come up, things that you would never even think of. And over a short period of time, actually, you'll start to develop a lease that works for you and is legally sound in your state. And it will cover every situation so that when something arises and your tenants have an argument, you can just point back to the lease and say, hey, listen, I'm not a bad guy. Here's the lease. This is how it's going to be executed, and this is how it's going to be addressed. Let's just execute what we both agreed to. In the cases of, let's say somebody wants to leave early and they want to terminate their lease, but they don't want to pay the rest of it, but they have no reason to really leave. You can point to the early termination clause that says that they can pay 2 months worth of rent to break the lease. And that just is an easy way to handle it. Number 2, I mentioned that every adult applicant needs to fill out an application and sign a lease. The reason that you do that is because it's important for all adult applicants to have joint and several liability. That is a legal term, but what that means is it's kind of like the Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all. Every adult occupant who's on the lease is responsible for the full rent amount, but if one of them leaves, then the other ones are still responsible. They don't pay 2/3 of the rent because the third person left. They still have to pay the full amount. And this is having joint and several liability spelled out in your lease forces that. Number 3, review the entire lease with your applicants and use e-signature tools. I really like this because it not only puts the lease somewhere up on a website, like the tools website where the tenant can find it, not only at the time of the lease signing, but 6 months later when they forget where their lease is, they can actually go just download it. But 2, it makes it really easy to sign somebody who may not be in the area. So I do this a lot when I get out-of-staters who want to rent my places. I can usually get an e-signature or a lease signed within a half an hour, and I couldn't do that even if I wanted to meet with them in person, even if they were local. So there are 3 tools that I recommend. One's called Hello Sign, the next one is Sign Now, and the last one is DocuSign. All 3 of those are listed on the Landlordology Services directory, which is on landlordology.com. So you can either type those terms into Google or go to the Landlordology to get the links. After you sign a lease, it is time to move in. Lease signing is a big deal because once you have that deposit and the lease is signed, then you're golden. You just have to kind of schedule the move in and make sure that they're happy and they can get in and deal with keys. So one thing I do is I clearly specify move in and move out times in the lease. And the reason I do this, people wonder why, but instead of just making days in the lease, like, hey, you can move in on the 1st and you move out on the 31st, I actually say you can move in at 2 o'clock on the 1st in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you have to move out by 10 a.m. on the 31st at the end of your lease. And the reason I do this is because, think about it. If somebody moves out at 10 a.m. on the 31st, and the next person's not moving in until the 1st of the next day, that actually gives me 28 hours of paid for rent, but I also can use that time to make repairs and do massive repairs like replace carpet or drywall a whole wall and sand it and paint it and all that stuff. It's excellent because unlike hoteling, you're not really sometimes paying by the hour, or you're definitely not paying by the hour, but you're paying by the month. And so they have to pay that full day. Number 2, I never, ever, ever give out keys earlier than day 1 of the lease. It's a liability. I mean, imagine if you did have a tenant in there on the 31st and you gave out a key to the new tenant on the 28th. And though they may promise to keep it safe and not visit the house, they're tempted, especially if they have a lot of stuff to move and they're like, hey, it won't hurt if I go move over, just put some stuff in the driveway or the garage. I won't go in the house, but I'll put it in the backyard. That's a violation. And not only is it a liability for the current tenant, if they move stuff in the backyard, if that's the least of it, that's awesome. But heaven forbid someone actually breaks in and gets hurt and uses the key you gave them, right? So never give out keys until day one of the actual lease. Number 3, allow the tenant to document the condition and perform the move-in inspection. I usually do it with them if I can, but a lot of times, if I can't, I don't sweat it. I just give them the move-in sheet and I say, check it off. Go through this, be detailed. I want you to be detailed because it provides me a list to go through and make repairs on, but also, I have a good understanding of what the property looks like before they move in because I probably just spent a day or two, doing a transition and getting it ready. So if they say there's a giant hole in the wall, then I know that there wasn't, and they must have done that when they moved in, and I wouldn't sign off on the move-in sheet. But it gives them a say in the matter. I think that's so important. Otherwise, if you do the move-in sheet and they argue it, they can't really argue with you because if you're convinced of one thing, and I just think you need to give them a say in the matter so that they can sign off on it, and that's how you do it. Number 4, I usually like to give a welcome gift, and I used to spend lots of money, and I used to do, if I had 6 tenants moving into a big house, I would each give them like a $10 iTunes gift card, and that was kind of expensive. And I used to do all these elaborate things and big gift baskets, but I never really got a thank you. Occasionally maybe a text message. But then what I started doing was I created a $10 welcome gift made out of essential items. And I actually wrote a post, and I think I called it Bathroom Essentials on Move-In Day. And basically what it is a roll of paper towels, a roll of toilet paper, maybe a trash bag, a little bar of hotel soap, and a shower liner. Not even the shower curtain, just like the $1.50 plastic clear shower liner you can get at the dollar store. And just have it for them when they move in because they're sweaty. They've been moving boxes all day, and they don't really care about a bottle of wine, but they really would like to take a shower, or use the toilet, and there's no toilet paper there. A lot of people don't realize that when you move into an unfurnished unit, there's no shower curtain. So having those things really seemed to go well, and actually I started receiving thank yous, like really big thank yous, when I started giving that bathroom essential kit. So that would be my recommendation. The best part is it costs about $10. Collecting rent. So they're moved in, they're already, hopefully set up with automatic payments, but that gets me to number 1. In my lease, I actually mandate that they pay online and automatically through Cozy. I work for Cozy, but even if I didn't, I would still use it. I think it's the absolute best tool for independent landlords. And what that does is it not only does it let them pay online, like all their other bills on the, in their arsenal, and everything else is paid online, but for a lot of people, rent isn't. So make it online and make it automatic. What that means is they set it up so that it's a recurring pay that happens on whatever day they choose, before the deadline of the first, and it just comes out of their bank account and then goes straight to yours. So when it's automatic, they won't forget. Number 2, charge hefty late fees. Now, be sure you check your state laws on that, but what I like to do is I set a very large late fee as an intimidation, very large within the confines of the law, and then if I want to waive it at any point, I can. But I like to kind of start out stern to make them realize that I'm not messing around. Number 3, set up an operating bank account. This is different from the security deposit account. So let's just pretend you have one property. Well, you'd have your personal checking account, personal savings, but then you'd have one security deposit account, which is only used to hold that security deposit. And then you'd have an operating bank account. And the reason I say that is because it's not great to mingle those funds as well. So all the rent that comes in goes into your operating bank account, and that's the only thing that happens, or that's the only money that really goes in there. And then you use that operating bank account to pay vendors and pay contractors. So that way you never really mingle it with your personal funds, and you'll never really spend rent on a vacation instead of paying the roofer. And when it's time to pay your mortgage, you can pay it out of that bank account, or you can issue funds to you. If you want to get paid the excess, just send it, transfer it over to another account, like your personal account. Number 4, don't collect last month's rent. This is very popular to do, and I've done it before. But honestly, there are a lot of state rules that regulate last month's rent. They call it prepaid funds, and you have to collect interest on it a lot of times, and you have to put it in its own bank account also, and you have to report on it for the tenant, and it's a mess. So if you want that extra security that last month's rent provides, just charge a larger security deposit. Take 2 months worth of rent if your state will let you take, instead of 1 month security deposit and last month's rent. A lot of times people just get mixed up and they forget the last month's rent was paid, or they spend it, or they do something else with it, and then the last month comes around and the tenant's like, hey, remember I paid you, and you're like, oh shoot, I spent that money. So anyway, just take a bigger deposit. Don't mess around with last month's rents. It's very cloudy and murky, and it's just not fun when it goes wrong. After you're set up collecting rent and it's set automatically so that you don't have to worry about it, you can just forget it. Then you just have to go through ongoing maintenance of the house. And the best practices that I like to do for this is I like to acknowledge tenants' request within hours, not days, and almost immediately if you can. But just get back to them. You don't have to have an answer. Just say, hey, listen, I heard your request. I'm going to look into it. And that's it. You just have to tell them you heard you. You heard them. Number two, I actually tell my tenants to call me anytime. People will argue with this, and the number one thing that I hear from people who are not landlords about being landlords is they say, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to deal with tenants because I don't want them calling me at 2 a.m, with a clogged toilet. Well, it's like, yeah, sure. I mean, I get it, a clogged toilet. What are you going to do at 2 a.m? But honestly, tenants are smarter than that. They know what is a critical thing and what isn't. They hopefully won't ever call you about a clogged toilet at 2 a.m. They'll deal with it, the next day. But if there is something wrong, maybe the roof is leaking, or maybe there are sparks coming out of the electrical panel, or maybe you lost power and a transformer blew up and it's affecting you, or if it's severe enough, you do want them to call you. You want to be the person that decides, do I need to call emergency services or do I need to go over there? What if my basement's flooding? I would want to know right away. And then be available via text message or SMS. I think the majority of my tenants actually try to communicate with me SMS. And then if that doesn't work, they'll send an email to document it. But I honestly don't care one way or the other because it's all recorded in writing, whether it's on my phone or in an email. But it just is another great service to let them text you if they can. Number three, don't go over there without giving proper notice. Every single time. Each state has their own rules on how much notice is required. But even if your state isn't clear on that, just 24 hours is a great round number. Usually everyone will be okay with that. If you say, hey, listen, I have to give written notice 24 hours in advance. And yeah, you could put a thing on their door at 24 hours in advance, like an actual written notice. But I think that a lot of times email is sufficient. I mean, the point of it is just to make sure that they understand, so that they got the message. Yeah, email's a little harder to prove in court, but I've never had a problem with it. Number four, use a lockbox for trusted contractors. I do this. I do this because I have to send over contractors oftentimes and I'm not there, and I don't really want to be there. I don't need to be there, and so I'll make my tenants meet with those contractors. But if those contractors are there and my tenants aren't there, I usually have a lockbox kind of locked around the gas line, or some secure railing or something that can't be sawed off or cut or whatever. And I have a key in there, and I basically get the permission from the tenants to let that contractor in, and it's only a contractor that you trust, that you've worked with for many years, and that the contractor knows to represent you well. So he or she should never go in if there's tenants in the house, with a key. They should always be let in. But if it's abandoned or if it's not occupied at that moment, send that contractor in and then change the combination. Don't ever give that lockbox combo to your tenants because they will abuse it. They will borrow that key when they get locked out, or they will give it to their friends or whatever, and they won't put it back or let you know. And so then when you actually need it, it won't be there. So it's probably best if you don't even tell your tenants you have a lockbox on the property. and then only use it sparingly. After the lease is over, it is time to consider renewal or move out. And the best way that I've been able to handle move out so that I don't have any vacancies is that I require in my lease that the tenant has to give me 60-day notice of non-renewal, specifically on fixed term leases. Most of the time, you don't have to give any notice for fixed term leases, but in the actual statute, it doesn't say one way or the other. It just doesn't say that there is a required notice. It just is kind of mute on the fact. So you can require things in your lease that where the statutes are mute or don't forbid them, and the tenant will agree to those, and they have to abide by those. The 60-day notice, what that does is it basically says, you don't have to leave. You can renew if you want to, if I'm willing to as well, but you just have to tell me if you're going to leave or renew. And if they say, oh, I'm going to renew, and then 30 days later they say I'm going to leave, then they're still responsible for 60 days of rent. So that just gives you the opportunity. If they are going to leave, you now have 2 full months to find new tenants. So when they do tell me they are going to leave, I start looking for tenants and posting ads about anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks before the end of their lease, and I start scheduling showings and those open houses that I mentioned, so that I have plenty of time to sign a lease. Number 2, don't always raise the rent, and that's really a huge incentive. I like to use that as a motivation to stay. If I really like the tenant, I'll say, hey, I'll keep you around for another 2 or 3 years if you want, and I promise I won't raise the rent, and I'll sign to that. And that's usually a huge bargaining chip, even if you didn't intend to raise the rent anyway. You can phrase it like that. I think a quality tenant who pays rent on time is worth his or her gold in weight, and so, or his or her weight in gold, I think the phrase is. And I'm willing to sacrifice that small increase just to have a great tenant. I'll make it up, next time there's a move in, move out. Number 3, host showings 4 to 6 weeks out. I mentioned that earlier. And then number 4, provide instructions and a cleaning list. This is totally key because a lot of tenants don't realize how bad they are at cleaning. They don't understand. No one ever taught them. They don't really realize that you have to use special chemicals here and there, or heaven forbid they mix ammonia and bleach and they get themselves killed, or just give them a cleaning list and say, this is what I expect you to do if you want your deposit back, and use that as the gauge. Obviously you're comparing it to the move-in sheet, but that helps them, and give them tips on what to use. Like, there's a product called Easy Off that works fantastic on ovens. So I usually give them that help guide, and that makes, ensures that they do a phenomenal job cleaning. And if they just decide to revolt and don't want to do it, then I can hire a cleaning agency to come do that for them. So that's the end of the life cycle, actually. So once you have a tenant that moves out, you start the process all over again, and you move somebody else back in. Now we're going to move on to rental laws. And rental laws in particular are a tricky thing because they vary from state to state, or even from county to county. And you really do have to understand what they are for your area. Otherwise, you can really get into some deep trouble. So what I'm going to discuss are general best practices and general rental laws that I see consistently among all of the states. They are going to vary a little bit, but with that said, please remember I am not a lawyer, so please review these with your lawyer if you want to take these and put them in your lease. So there's really not a set federal law for rental properties and housing. There is the Housing Act, and there is the Uniform Residential Landlord-Tenant Act of 1972, so very old. But what that did in 1972 is that set the framework, or the skeleton framework, for all the other states to build their landlord-tenant acts. And now, however, I think about half of the states participated in it, and participation is optional. So you have some states that kind of follow this, and then you have some states that just kind of went rogue and did their own thing, or lack of. And it's hard to understand. So there's really no consistency among the states, but there are some similarities, and that's what we're going to get into next. So a big one, and the number one cause of lawsuits around rental housing, is the deposit. be sure that you return the deposit, typically between 15 and 60 days after move out and or lease termination. It could be one or the other. Some states say that when the tenant surrenders the premises when the clock starts, and other people say, well, maybe they moved out early, but their lease doesn't terminate for another 15 days. It starts after they terminate their lease, or after it expires, I should say. And then when you return that deposit, make sure you give an itemized receipt and then a separate account. So basically, you want to make sure that you've told them exactly what you're spending that money on if you're holding anything, and that it came from that separate account and you've got proof of it. If you don't have that itemized list, then you're not really able to withhold anything in a lot of states. You could actually be sued for, which I mentioned in number 3, you can be sued for 1 to 3 times the amount of the security deposit just by doing it wrong. So don't get into that one. That's a messy business. Just be sure you document everything really, really, really well, and you should be all right. Number 4, non-refundable fees are generally not allowed. There are only a few states mentioned here that you can actually use non-refundable fees. And what I mean by that is, let's say your lease says, there's $1,000 deposit, but 300 of it is non-refundable and will be used for cleaning the place when you move out. And you can't really do that because you don't know for sure that the tenant isn't going to clean really well, and maybe you don't need to hire that cleaning company. And so therefore that $300 really wasn't used for anything. So you just have to handle it as it goes. I recommend never doing non-refundable fees because that gets into lawsuits also. And, every tenant wants to know that their deposit is fully refundable if they behave themselves. And that's what I would recommend. Number 5, grace periods. Typically, range from anywhere from 0 to 15 days. I've only seen a few states that say that you have to give a 15-day grace period because that seems like a lot. But a lot of times it's 0 to 5 days. And just make sure you know what your state laws are about that. We'll get into that in a minute, and I'll show you where you can find that. Number 6, late fees. I like to limit it by percentage or by day. Personally, I recommend doing a one-time fee that's a percentage plus a small daily fee. So what that looks like is, if the rent is $1,000 and the late fee is, let's say 5% or even 10% perhaps, 5%. And I would say if I had a 0-day late fee policy where if it's not paid by the first, but on the second, you're going to get a $50 late fee, which is 5%, or $50 late fee, and then on the third, the day after that initial late fee, you get a small daily late fee of $20. And the reason I do not only the one-time fee, but a daily fee thereafter is that after that first one-time late fee happens, there's no incentive for the tenant to actually pay rent after that. I mean, more often than not, if they're like, well, I've already got a late fee, why would I pay my rent on the 3rd? I could just wait until, the 25th of the month, and I could go buy my flat screen with this paycheck. That's kind of the way they think. And so if they know that they're racking up $20 every single day thereafter the second, then they're going to pay their rent as quickly as they can. So that's the reason I recommend that. And again, make sure you check your state laws for that one. Number 7, notice to enter. I mentioned this earlier, at least 24 hours typically. Some states like Colorado does not have a statute on this, and that's important to know. But if you just show up randomly, even though there's no statute, I'm sure a judge will ping you for that because it's just not acceptable. Number 8, I mentioned the federal 7, as I call them, discrimination classes, but it's important to know that sometimes, depending on your city or state, marital status, sexual orientation, source of income, or age can also be protected classes. Again, not sex offender, but these other ones are in a lot of states. And the reason I mentioned source of income, some people get confused about that. They're like, oh, well, they have multiple jobs or the type of job they have. Well, that's not really what it's talking about. It's saying that you can't discriminate based on where they get their money, not what type of job they have. So When I say where, it's typically either by job or a trust fund. Perhaps you have a person who has a $2 million trust fund and they're getting payments off of that, but they don't have a job. They're still qualified because they make, they have that paycheck really. Or sometimes even Section 8 housing. You can't discriminate based on where they're getting that money from. That doesn't mean that you have to participate in Section 8 or that they will qualify according to your other criteria, but you can't discriminate upon the source. Number 8, when you can terminate for non-payment. So this is often a question where people get confused. They're like, oh, I have a month-to-month. I have to give 30 days notice no matter what, but they're not paying their rent. It's like, well, no, if they're not paying their rent, they can't stay there. And a lot of times states will either have an immediate termination clause or it's somewhere between 0 and 10 days. So you can tell them, hey, you have 10 days to pay up or I'm terminating your lease, and that's that. Again, for number 9, it's similar. Lease violations are a little less severe than not paying rent. But if they go and they get 3 St. Bernards and they put them in the house, even though your lease says no pets, you can give them a 30-day, or whatever your state is, but let's say 30-day notice to remedy the situation, meaning kick those dogs out or you're going to terminate the lease. There are a few states that allow unconditional quit notices. Arkansas, North Dakota, West Virginia, Louisiana, Ohio, Wyoming, Montana, and South Dakota are the only ones that I know of, and that's where you can terminate the lease without giving the tenant an option to remedy the situation. So in the case of the St. Bernards, you could just say, hey, listen, your lease has been terminated because you had dogs. I'm not going to give you a chance to get rid of them and keep your lease. Best practices, generally speaking, keep your heat or keep the heat at a potential 68. It doesn't mean that you're responsible for the heating bill, but that you actually have to give the tenant the ability to have the heat at 68 so they don't freeze. This is just a health issue. Number 2, bedrooms always need 2 exits or 2 forms of egress to escape in case of an emergency. Smoke detectors, make sure you put one in every single bedroom. It's just by law. I mean, heaven forbid there was an accident and the fire marshal determined that you didn't have proper smoke detectors in each bedroom, then you could potentially be held liable. But make sure you also have CO detectors within 15 feet of every bedroom. These are just, you can buy a 5-pack at Costco. I mean, just go crazy with them and you can never have enough, really. Number 4, nuisances. In a lot of states or cities, the landlord can actually get fined by the city if the tenants are a nuisance. This could be that they pile up trash or they're making too much noise, or they just don't mow their lawn, because a lot of times, rats and mice will then get into the high weeds and cause issues. So, can you imagine, going to jail and being like, well, I went to jail because I didn't mow my lawn. Just make sure that you kind of do a check-in once a month and you can check on these things and see if they're mowing the grass, and you can tell them it's a city ordinance. They need to do this stuff. Okay, next we're moving on to resources. And the reason I have this section is strictly because I like to give a lot of value in these presentations, and I want to show you where you can find a lot of really great free stuff. So I've taken a lot of the knowledge that I have and I've talked to a lot of people and I've built a lot of resources that are free. And they're all on Landlordology. And on Landlordology, you can find a bunch of stuff that links to other non-Landlordology sites and products and things that you can go to. So first are the state laws. This is, I referenced this a few times. This is basically a giant map on Landlordology where you click on your state and you can get all the summaries that we've kind of gone through the state laws and tried to summarize them for you and actually cited the references, so you can go read the actual statutes if you want and figure out what's applicable to you. We also have free guides. These are more in-depth books, ebooks really, that you can download and read, and they're pretty thorough and exhaustive, and they will walk you through tenant screening, marketing with Craigslist, or moving tenants into your property. The directory, we have a services directory that basically started out as what I called the toolbox originally, but it was really just a place where you could go in these various categories like software or legal forms or books and find out, well, what are some of the best products out there. And so I will say that I'm not affiliated with any of these other companies that we've listed here, and we don't get any sort of affiliate revenue or kickback or anything. We don't have that relationship with them. These are literally just products that I think are fantastic for independent landlords. Going through the landlord lifecycle step by step. And so I walked through these steps in this presentation, but there's a whole lot more that you can learn by walking through the landlord lifecycle and learning how to be a landlord through this page. And then also there's a new thing that we have called Ask Lucas, and it's really just a Q&A podcast about landlording. You can actually submit a question online and through a voice recording, and I'll get it, and then I'll answer it in the podcast. It's a lot of fun, and it's been pretty successful so far. You can also find it on iTunes and Stitcher as well. Next, I want to talk about Cozy. So I mentioned that Landlordology is brought to you by Cozy, and Cozy makes software for landlords. It is, in my opinion, the absolute best product for independent landlords, and I'm really not just saying that. It just lets landlords collect rent, collect applications, screen those tenants, order credit reports, and the best part is it's absolutely free. So Cozy got its start as a Google startup. The seed money came from Google, and then we've had some really fantastic investors to pour into this because we were trying to change the landlord-tenant relationship for the better and make it easy to manage your own properties. And there's no reason why you would need to pay someone else to do it if you're willing to try it yourself. So what Cozy does, like I mentioned, online rent collection. The thing that sets Cozy apart in this area is that not only will it collect rent online and make it automatic, but it will group your tenants' rent together and then send you one giant lump sum payment. That's awesome because it supports joint and several liability. All three of those tenants have to pay together before you'll get the money. So you'll never get 2/3 of the rent, and then Mark or Jordan will say, hey, sorry about it, and then the other ones are like, hey, why is our rent late? It's like, because Mark didn't pay. You don't even have to deal with that. It's all grouped together. Tenant screening. Not only do you collect the online rental applications, which here is an example of one, but then you can request a credit report, which I'll get to in a second. This credit report comes straight from Experian, and it is incredibly easy to read. So no more having to mine through a bunch of data and then try to figure out what it actually means to you. This is a fantastic, what you see on the screen is actually a fantastic overview of that credit report so that you can make a clear decision. The best part is that's free for you too. You request it, we manage that transaction through Cozy, and then the tenant actually just purchases it through Experian without a separate login or anything, and then shares it with you, so it'll just show up in your account. So that's Cozy. Check it out for free. Check it out and use it for free. It is completely free, and it's cozy.co. Now we've moved on to the question and answer time. Thanks for bearing with me. I know that this presentation is getting close. It's about 2 or 3 more minutes left, but we'll go over as long as you guys want to stay to answer questions. So if anybody has a question, feel free to just type it into that chat window that's in your control panel on your right-hand side, and I'll just answer it here as we go through. Okay, so Janice is asking, how is the money transferred when you do online rent collection? And that is a great question because what happens is basically the tenant and the landlord both provide the bank account information, whether it's through Cozy or another transaction provider. Other softwares are out there too, but through Cozy in particular, I can speak to. You enter your information, and it literally does an ACH transaction from one account to the next, and so it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 days, but that's often that's often less than what it would take if there was a bounce check or an actual physical checks to process. So it's really great because it is automatic, and you don't ever have to go to the bank or deal with checks or bounce checks or anything. But it takes 3 to 5 days. All right, next question. Abigail, will this webinar be available, accessible to review again at a later time? Yes, absolutely. So I am recording this right now, and assuming that the recording turns out okay, I'll publish it on Landlordology and on YouTube as well, so you can go back and review these things at a later time. You're welcome. Okay, Eliza, I'm sorry, or Eliza, sorry, the name cut off there. Is it recommended to open a corporation to buy houses for protection if you are sued? I got your email earlier today. Thank you for that, and I'm glad you asked it here. I will tell you that I am not a business attorney, and so take this with a grain of salt. I can tell you what I've done at the advice of my attorneys. I learned very quickly that in order, I learned very quickly that if you want to truly protect yourself from a liability standpoint, you have to remove your name off of everything that has to do with the rental properties. So that's tricky because unless you bought a property with all cash or you bought it in the form of a trust or something, your name is probably on the deed. If you bought it with a mortgage, then I'm almost 100% sure that your name is on the deed because they want a personal note or a personal guarantee for that. So if a tenant trips and breaks their arm on the stairs and they want to sue somebody, they can sue the property manager. They can sue, maybe a repair guy that was fixing the stairs, and they can sue the person who owns the house. And it's very easy to find, who owns property because it's all public record anyway, and they can sue all of those people in a joint lawsuit. And so, yes, you may create maybe a property management LLC or a corporation to kind of run your business, but that doesn't protect you if your name is on the deed. So you truly have to get the deeds out of the name, out of your name, and you have to run your business in a corporation or in a trust or something, and that way you're not connected to it in any form or fashion. It seems silly to run a property management company or hide behind an LLC if your name is already or existing on the deed. I do, just for kicks. I do run everything out of a single member LLC that is a pass through entity, and LLCs are beautiful for that because you don't have to file extra paperwork at tax time. You can actually claim it on your standard income tax, and all of that revenue gets passed straight through. But from a protection standpoint, it is a little bit better than not having anything at all. So I do a single member LLC, and other people I know do corporations, but make sure that you get that deed out of there too so that you're not connected that way. Thanks. Okay, are there any more questions? All right. Thanks, guys. If there are more questions later on, you think of something, feel free to go to Ask Lucas. I'm really excited that you all attended and that I have I have a little gauge on my computer here that shows that 100% of you are actually watching the presentation as we speak, rather than doing other things on your computer. So so excited, and thank you for participating. Have a wonderful night, and feel free to leave comments or ask questions on Landlordology, and I will get back to you there too. Take care.